And for our 12th interview, we've got longtime player Midas, who is tied for the most times making a finals of a tournament without having yet won one. This image is from Tomb Raider, as you can probably tell. I have certainly been pronouncing his name wrong the whole time. King Midas is pronounced Midas, I believe, not Midas. But I'm too committed to the pronunciation until he tells me, no, you're totally wrong. And he has not told me that yet, so I'm gonna stick to my incorrect pronunciation. So let's get to the interview. How would you describe your triple triad play/style? I would consider myself a situational player that can neither be labeled as particularly aggressive nor defensive. I usually define my strategy for every game anew, and my plans highly depend on the hand and opponent I'm facing. My main strategy is to get to mid-game in a positionally sound and hopefully winning position, as this is where I feel comfortable calculating the rest of the game, so typically around the Calc 5 mark, meaning with around 5 moves left in the game. In the early game, I try to spot the cards that will be useful further down the line, and try to avoid major mistakes that will cost me the game right away, regardless of precise calculations. Who is your most interesting opponent? Oh, actually, I have a thought on style. Because in chess, I tend to think style is a way of labeling one's weaknesses and sort of trying to make them a positive to yourself. Like when someone says, I am an aggressive player, they often use that to justify the really bad but aggressive looking moves they make. You know, it's okay I made that move because I'm an aggressive player instead of like just trying to make good moves. Because some positions call for aggression and some positions do not. So in games of this ilk, I tend to respect people that do not feel they are committed particularly strongly to any end of some kind of spectrum, because I think usually that is a way of defining the ways in which you go wrong and the ways in which you tell yourself that's okay. And it is okay, you know, this is a game. But I think it can be useful not to define yourself stylistically. And how I try to use stylistic stuff in Triple Triad is I try to identify the directions in which players find good moves that I do not. For instance, I really often talk about Delhi because I think he finds a bunch of strong moves that are not in my wheelhouse, which is why I find his style interesting, because he's doing different things, but I do not conceive of it as a weakness, right? Alright, that's a bit of field. Let's get back to the Midas interview, because this is a really good one. Who is your most interesting opponent? I had the most fun in challenging games with Seto, especially with random hands. He is excellent at playing moves that you wouldn't expect, agreed, and can turn a smooth and relaxed match into a real sweat show. He brings a lot of creativity to the board, allowing him to play moves that only make sense much later in the game. Yeah. Who is your toughest opponent? Back in the day, it would have been Yojimbo, especially around the time I first met him on that Czech Final Fantasy forum called ffpower.cz, where I signed up on their proprietary Triple Triad server with an unnecessarily cocky alter ego simply named I1, or I_1, with the idea of dominating their tournaments. Little did I know that some players there had tremendous skills on the board, and what would ruin my plans soon enough. Yojimbo especially had an absolute stellar tournament record on this site and a win-loss ratio that looked almost cheated. We played a lot of games back then in tournament as well as casual settings, and he felt like an unbreakable wall to me. Yojimbo gave me tons of headaches back then, but we also became close friends after that. What was very interesting, however, is that site had 24-hour per move games, so kind of comparable to daily chess, or correspondence chess, where you could spend up to 24 hours to find the best move possible. You would then confirm the move and wait for the opponent to make his move. This was also very common in tournament settings, resulting in tournaments that would last for weeks to no end, especially when facing no end, especially when facing players like Yojimbo or Chickeny. Nowadays, Akiyama tends to give me the most headache. I don't like him playing ultra fast, and he knows very well that I don't like that. It makes me question his moves way too much, whether they are actually good, or whether it's just another meme play to throw me off. Then again, everything I just said might also be a psyops to make him feel confident in his playing style against me. You never know. I've been so surprised by the speed of Akiyama. I knew Seto was fast from back in the day, but I sort of thought, like, when Akiyama faces a top opponent, he'll definitely slow down, right? But no, it's just how he plays, and it can be very off-putting. I remember, speaking of another great player mentioned here, when Chickeny was playing a match against one of my best AIs, he was really thrown off by it just me putting in the AI move within 30 seconds. And I feel really put off by that too. And I said I can slow down if that's preferred, putting in the AI move, because it sort of doesn't give you time. For me, it would be time to settle. For Chickeny, I think it was time to do some extra thinking. But playing fast is such a curious effect. 4. What formation or move types do you like more than other players do? This can be for either open or closed, or answer for both. I feel the most comfortable in L, T, and Q formations, and I am confident in being able to calculate the best outcomes in these scenarios. Regarding a specific move type, I like to play in 5 as a starting move, as it usually overwhelms opponents with options, while also granting me lots of possible follow-up moves after my opponent's move. Moreover, I feel it's also harder for my opponent to predict my next move, especially with pre-made hands that are specifically built for such a starter, and where a lot of follow-up moves look dangerous from the beginning. Playing in 5 also feels like saying, here I am, I'm not scared of you, bring it on. What formation or move type do you like less than other players do? X formations, especially when going second, and particularly in closed games. In open games, I still might get away with a decent result, but I usually try to prevent these formations by connecting rows, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 4, 7, when reasonable. Favorite way to meet a corner starter, a side starter, a center starter? I really like direct attacks in the adjacent spots, such as answering 1 with 2 or 4. Yeah, I've been moving towards doing those more and more often. I feel like this is not exactly expected by my opponents, and if it is, their line analyses might not go beyond the next 2 or 3 moves, as there usually are the other moves and lines to worry about. My next favorite choice would be to go into adjacent corners, as this usually leads to more beneficial positions than going in 5, for example. At least that's my feeling. Have we backtested that yet? So I should have brought it up. I did some stats just on, I was looking at these a while ago and I haven't updated them for a bit, but I did some stats just on open randoms of what scored best against different starter types. Let me see if I can, that's not it. Let me see if I can find this quickly. I'll pause the video, then you don't have to wait while I do this nonsense. Excellent idea. So I have about 300 corner starter games on record, and capturing corner starters has indeed outscored center plays, while adjacent corners have been approximately on par with center plays. But most responses to corner starters, the win percentages are very similar. They're all slightly under 50%, except far sides, which have done really poorly. But the other types haven't, at least in the stats I have, haven't really differentiated from each other. I do think, however, it is interesting that Midas specifically identifies capture and adjacent corners, because I think these are two moves that, in a sort of stylistic sense, really go well together, but are not often employed by the same players, or at least not in my experience. Like, Turds and I were players that really liked the adjacent corners, but didn't like capturing so much back in the day, and I started moving more towards capturing a bunch. And then there are, of course, players who like to capture, but often players that like to capture like to play close to the action. MC like to capture, Kamikaze sometimes. A bunch of players like that. And I think the current kind of group of boss players does a nice combination of both of them. And the reason I think they're stylistically interesting and similar is because they both often directly lead to L's, right? If you go in 1 and I take from 2, if you recapture from 4, my likely next move, not guaranteed, but likely, is to go in 3 or 7, either way setting up an L. And if when I capture from 2, you go in 3, I'm likely to go in 4 or 6, again setting up an L. And so the capture kind of can force an L. Well, an adjacent corner, if you start in 1 and I go in 3, often you will then block 2, and I will play in 4 or 6, and again have an L. And so I think of these as the two types of playing that attempt to force an L-type setup. And L's can be really good for second turn, and if, as Midas has mentioned, you are particularly good at calculating L's, this can be a really effective thing to aim for, because L's are really powerful for the second turn player in quite a lot of situations. So I think combining these two move types as your favorites probably leads to, if you're good at L's or do that and gain comfort in L's, is probably a really effective pairing of move types. Because when you don't have one, you can easily... I think they also cover for each other's weakness as well, right? If you have one side of their starter but not the other, it gives you a choice. Maybe you have a good way to just take from the side you can take and force the action that way. And maybe you can set up so that you now have a threat on the other side of their starter. And it gives you different tools depending on which one works better. So I did have the thought a while ago. I realize I'm going too much on my own thoughts and not enough on Midas's here, but they're very interesting. So they sent me off on different paths. Is that I think it's a really solid pairing of move types. Like, if you're only comfortable, not that he's only comfortable with these two move types, but if you were only comfortable with two types of responses to a corner starter, I think this would be a really strong pairing. Weirdly, I think if you were only comfortable with one type of reply, I would say go with opposite corners, which is neither of those, but that's a whole different thing. Do you have a preferred starter type? Does that change between random and hand games? Does it change between open and closed? Unless I decide to channel my inner Chad and go in 5, I tend to play into corners that may either be safe and well covered, or unsafe and easy to take back with most of my other cards. This varies from game to game, and as alluded to earlier, I have no real preferences here, as it really comes down to whom I'm playing and what kind of hand I'm up against. With closed, it depends much more on the rule set itself and the usefulness of the cards I am holding. I really like to get rid of cards that aren't of any benefit for the rule set early on. I think of a 5-4-4-4 in an all-rule level 4 game. Other than that, I tend to throw such cards into the middle to keep my options open. Yeah, totally on board here. How do you spend time? We've added a question to the questionnaire, because specifically thinking about players like Akiyama and Turds and I having a conversation about what we spend opponents' time doing. And I tend to spend it recovering and thinking about positional generalities, but not really forcing myself to calculate specifics, giving myself some recovery from thinking. And so I was really curious what other really strong players look for, and Midas is the first person we're getting a response with. I'm usually busy. So yeah, how do you spend time during the opponent's move? Thinking specific lines, thinking about general things, spacing out. I'm usually busy calculating the opponent's most probable lines and making notes of moves that will lead to an unfavorable result later on. More importantly, I focus on finding the one tie where I'm 99% confident that this is indeed a tie, and making a mental or sometimes even physical note. Especially in high-stakes games against strong opponents, I might at times face a lot of pressure with the clock ticking down and reaching the last 60 seconds. If I by then still don't find any good line, I must be able to rely on my former, more calm self to have found a move that does indeed not lead to a loss. Yeah, this is a common panic issue. I mean, in my Tried War semifinals against Turds, he had 2 lines he thought tied, and looking back at one of them at the very end, suddenly he couldn't find the tying line, so he played the other, but he hadn't really checked either, and he wasn't really trusting his previous game calculation. And he ended up discarding the one he had thought more about that was a tie for the one he had thought about less that wasn't actually a tie. And I think being really careful to lock something in, make sure you know it's there, and make sure you have a way to hold on to it. I always thought like doing something physical was a little out of bounds, but I think writing down like just the name of a move that's your tie, I think that's totally fair. Like, I think, like, making cards and playing out games with them during the game would be an unfair advantage, much like in chess, you can't move the pieces to see the future position. But I think writing down a note is totally legitimate and a good way to lock that into your head, be it a physical note or just making sure you hold it in your brain. Because there's so many positions which people throw away low on time because they don't hold their previous calculations, and I've certainly done that many a time. Alright, now we get into the fun history. What is your proudest Triple Triad moment? Joining the Brotherhood of Seed by beating Yojimbo 2-1 in an official tryout match. Even years before Yojimbo took over the clan, and when it was still under leadership of Scythe, I always wanted to be part of Brotherhood of Seed. However, I just wasn't good enough, and I didn't feel like putting in the effort required to get on level par back then. Even after Yojimbo took over, I still couldn't beat other elite recruiters, such as Vid, for example, who at that time was also a very strong and accomplished player, definitely. Later, beating Yojimbo and scoring Clan Wars and Clan League victories with the team made it all so much more awesome for me, especially since the skill average of the team was definitely above mine, and I was able to not fuck up and score important wins. Yeah, winning a multi-game tryout against a player like that is a real huge achievement. I really love it when players identify as the proudest moments, having kind of earned their way into a clan that really let them know they had, made it and succeeded as a player in a way that's really gratifying and validating of the work people put in. And I think it's cool when people jump for the clan stuff. And obviously Brotherhood of Seed means a lot to Midas, and we'll get to more of that. My other proudest moment is also connected to Brotherhood of Seed, and it's not taking over Brotherhood of Seed last year, as quite frankly, any one of our guys could have stepped up to do so, but mutually being accepted as the new leader by people with a much longer history in the clan. Yeah, that's a really awesome feeling. Because you have a bunch of people, you feel anyone could run it and do a good job, but people want and value you doing it. That feels wonderful and is a really nice communal feeling. Furthermore, it's so great to see that the willingness to represent our clan in official tournaments still hasn't gone down a single bit since 2010, and that the high amount of loyalty to the clan is still there in 2022, which has always been our number one strength. Yeah, Brotherhood of Seed certainly manages loyalty. Should Delial be banned? Yes or absolutely. Although I generally agree with banning everyone better than me so that I can finally win a big one, I don't enjoy the thought of leading a clan with me as the only player. Thus, the answer is no, as he is a key member of the community and a strong opponent in clan tournaments, which makes facing Avalanche so much more exciting. Should Elemental be abolished? Yes, or immediately. Do you actually understand how Element in combo and in +1/-1 situations works? I'm pretty sure that I don't. Other than that, I'm rather agnostic towards this rule, as I'm not using it in my games anyways. However, I don't necessarily like to see it in official tournaments, as it tends to create confusion, which makes the rule also very likable, for the very same reason. What clan or clans will always have a place in your heart? FFX clan, as this was my first real Triple Triad clan, and I have a lot of shared memories with the likes of Unreal, Bardock, Rhinoa, Scythe, Apex, etc. We have all been in FFX at some point, and it was great to have a big German-speaking TTA community. The other one would be Card Club, for which I played under the reign of Kaus Debonair. I always admired CC Ace and have a lot of respect for his accomplishments in the early days. He also shared tons of stories from early Triple Triad back when MIRC was still a thing, and frequented by the likes of Lord Lionheart, Swedish Penis, Wavy, and, well, Ace. Even though I have never been part of the CC core team, which existed way before my time anyways, I always admired it as the mythical powerhouse from the olden days. Yeah. It's so all way before my time, and sort of the rebirth of Card Club was sort of overlapped with me, I think. But it all feels like kind of legend to me, lore of the past. Player you think is most underrated? Given Wizup's, your investigative research and power ranking, I don't think there are any players left to be considered underrated. Thus, I can only name one player that is currently still under the radar, and definitely one of the better players on the site. Zulder. So Midas sent me this interview before I had put out the July, what month is it? The June power rankings for 2022, in which I awarded Zulder, based on people's votes, the match of the tournament with his win over recent Nephilim finalist Midas, our interview subject, in the first round. And it was a tremendous match. It was the longest match of the tournament. but not because like sometimes you get long matches because people can't convert wins. No, it was just Selder finding different ways to attack Midas' starters and to get early pressure, and Midas continually finding incredibly narrow paths to survive. And from the sound of Midas' self-description here, it sounds like Midas at least considers himself a player better at finding wins from advantageous positions than perhaps saving disadvantaged positions. He specifically said good at calculating from when he has a kind of narrowly winning position. On the other hand, we also know he does very good form things of making sure he has a tie first before spending time getting confused and trying to find winning possibilities. And I think that's a really valuable way to hold games. And he really showed impressive stuff. I mean, obviously, losing in the first round is no one's goal, but against a tough opponent who played that well, Midas survived a really long time there, and Selder was incredibly impressive. Who are your top 3 to 5 picks for GOAT? I like he divides here old school and new school, which is nice. Old school: Doc Evil, Nimlock, Karmazin, Lord Lionheart, Kamikaze, in no particular order. It's like a good list to me. New school: Yojimbo was up, Delial Seto, Akiyama, in no particular order. So obviously the relatively offbeat pick there is Akiyama, given the existence of the Polish brothers, Great Sephiroth, Slash of Time, and depending, I think he'd be considered new school. Koner as well, though he's a little longer tenured than. No, I guess he's similar tenured, probably a little newer than Delial and much older than Seto, much newer than Seto. But the people who have played Akiyama, I will admit, I sort of, I missed a while, and I came back, and I wanted to think of my era as the best and the toughest, and the people who came before me, I respected kind of the legacy. But for people who came after me, I kind of didn't want to believe they were actually that good, even though in general, competitions tend to get better. So I came in pretty Akiyama skeptical, even though turds have told me over and over, like, he would be in that top 10 all time if he had come around earlier. Like, he clearly plays well enough. He's clearly that kind of talent. And I did not want to believe it, but it does seem everyone who spent time playing him is fully on board with it, and I am slowly getting there. But my ego sort of gets in the way, in the same way, like, you accept the greats before you. You accept the greats with you. But, like, I mean, obviously this is a different level of competition. But you look at, like, NBA players, and they will reliably, like, give respect to those that came before and not respect whoever came after. And I feel like I have similar ego issues here. Moving on. It's nice to see new blood ranked so highly. When did you start playing, and what was your favorite era? I started playing in late 2003 and came from a German Final Fantasy forum where I also met a young Laguna Loire. I cannot speak. Where I also met a young Laguna Loire who would later be known as Apex or Flare.com, and like 5 other names too. In my tournament records, he's by far the hardest person to keep track of. He also went by Blackout, I think, briefly. Though someone else had a similar name. There's at least 1 or 2 more. Anyway, even though this early era would have been a great choice for my favorite era, given all the memories and friends I made back then, I'm a bigger fan of the current era. I have known the people I'm having daily chats with for decades now, and it's great to see how everyone is going their way, in and outside of TTA. Given everyone got older and more mature, Brotherhood of Seed as a clan has developed as well, and it feels like we grew even closer as a team now. It's awesome to see our chat flipping from making fun of the respective home countries of our members into a think tank discussing economics and finance, into a forum for personal development and life coaching in a matter of seconds. Great energy. Is he gonna make me fond of Brotherhood of Seed? I mean, excellent interview, but I must fight this. Like, I cannot accept these things, This is the enemy. Favorite rule sets. My favorite is probably level 10, same plus, plus wall, same wall, combo, random, open, although I really enjoy multi-level games as well, as they always felt a bit easier to calculate. Moreover, I seem to come up with better hands for multi-level games. Huh. I wonder why that is. During Nephilim, I was thinking a lot about how multi-level games have a bigger split in choice between what kind of cards you want. Do you want dynamic cards that can plus wall the biggest targets? Do you want power cards, like 8/8 corners if those are the biggest corners, things like that? Or do you want kind of tri-directional cards, stuff that because there's so many low levels, you want to be able to just have guaranteed captures against the low levels? So something like a 7/7/7/1 plays really badly against like level 7s, but plays really well just sweeping up level 3s, right? So I wonder which direction he goes here, because I think multi-level strategy is quite interesting, and I think I end up in good places, but don't have rules to get there, so it takes me too long to figure out where I want to be. Have you met any other Triple Triad players in person? I have met Scythe, Christian, and Phipps several times in person. Phipps I see pretty regularly, as we live only 8 kilometers apart from each other and share a mutual love for cigars that we smoke together every 2 to 3 weeks. It's also absolutely crazy to think that out of maybe 50 active Triple Triad players worldwide, one of them lives in my direct vicinity. Blows my mind every time. Yeah, that is pretty crazy when you put it like that. Obviously, it was a larger community then, but Pat the Patriot lived fairly in the same state as me, and in the same half of the state, but still a decent chunk of distance away. And I don't know if I've ever lived close to any other players. What is your biggest weakness as a player? You can evade the question if you think it's targetable. My biggest weakness is myself, has always been. My skill level scales with the level of motivation I'm bringing to the table. An excellent example would have been SE Nephilim, where I prepared a lot before every match and took them very seriously. Now, I'm sometimes struggling to prepare a couple of hands for rather important games, which might also be related to my rather busy real-life schedule. Moreover, I never was a very frequent player and didn't play a lot of casual games. I really enjoy open trade games against Seto and Akiyama, but that's about it, to be honest. I'm afraid these 2 factors probably hinder me from reaching my true skill ceiling. Yeah, clearly what we've learned is get rid of the real life. It's not important. But secondly, I think it is really hard to both reach top form, but also especially maintain top form without playing a lot. And that's always, I think, more than this is my personal opinion, I might just be wrong here. I think more than stopping someone from reaching their ceiling, it just means they're there so much less of the time. I think when not playing actively, people are so much more on their kind of second or third level game, like their C level game, and their A level game a lot less. And your A level game is definitely, you can raise it by playing more, but I think the bigger difference is just that you play at your top level less. Also, yeah, preparing for matches is really valuable, and people that regularly do it get an advantage out of it, and it is worth doing. Is there another question I haven't asked you'd like to answer? Yes, I have one. Should Sicilian horsemeat and fries sandwiches be banned? Yes or absolutely? This is a good question, so we may add it to the interview in the future. Definitely, given that Akiyama can't stop sharing his food experiences with us. He also torments us with pictures of them on a regular basis. Sicily has a lot of great food that I can absolutely recommend. This abomination is not one of them. And I think with that, we shall end the interview. I thought this was a great one. I think the passion for Brotherhood of Seed in that community, I think, really came through wonderfully here. And I think that's, I hate to admit it, but super cool. And yeah. Really appreciate Midas giving the amount of detail and thought he put into this one. I thought it was a really interesting one, which is part of why I kept talking about myself too much. because I kept having thoughts, because it kept bringing things up I thought were interesting. So thank you so much to Midas, and hope you enjoyed this one.